Hey guys, Patrick Johnston,
Stephen Hattie.
and we're here to talk about airlift to the Dominican Republic. So let's walk and talk. You know what, the biggest challenge for us as Canadians in the last, say, 6 months to a year has been the consolidation of aircraft or airlines in Canada that are starting, which then reduces aircraft lift to the Dominican Republic. If you think about it, Sunwing and WestJet are amalgamating. So over the next year, we're going to see that kind of disappear into one. Swoop, which is a low-cost carrier owned by WestJet, finishes flying domestically and internationally in transborder at the end of October, which is, of course, all three are owned by WestJet. So Swoop was flying into Punta Cana, WestJet was flying into here in Las Terrenas, and of course Plata and Punta Cana, and Sunwing was flying into Plata and Punta Cana. So you see how that can affect the landscape. Now the other Canadian airline, Air Transat, still flies, of course, Punta Cana, Las Terrenas, and Plata, but it really reduces it from WestJet, Sunwing, Swoop, and Air Canada, and whatever the other one I just mentioned, Air Transat. There was 5 airlines, and now what's going to be left eventually in the next 12 months, the WestJet group, Air Transat, and we can also fly that way. All right, so 5 airlines, as I mentioned, going down to really 3. But the challenge that brings to us is that prices will go up when competition goes down, and the selection and days of the week are not going to work in the favor of the consumer. It's always going to then work in the favor of the airline. On top of all of that, every airline around the world is recovering from the pandemic. They literally stopped flying, as we all know. So then all the senior people, pilots, anybody with skill, pilots, flight attendants, ground crew, catering, all those people couldn't sit around for a year waiting for things to happen again. So they moved on to find other work. And then, as we know, as Canadians and Americans are, the minute the world opened up again, all of us wanted to get back on the planes and go wherever we wanted to go. So the airlines have had a very difficult time adjusting to go from a cold start back up to pre-2019 levels with not enough staff. So here in Las Terrenas, from the US market, American Airlines stopped their twice-a-week flight on Wednesdays and Saturdays, as an example, and the blaming of it is on the pilot shortage. But all of that is in a mix of like, oh shit, what do we do? Now, about a year ago, here in the Dominican Republic, there was a brainchild in Santo Domingo that had decades of experience in the airline world. And what that group decided to do is buy aircraft certification 3 years ago. And then 1.5 years ago, they rebranded as Arajet. They started with one A320 Airbus equipment, but then converted over when their Boeing 737 MAX aircraft arrived in Santo Domingo. Now they have, in about a year, they have 5 737 MAX aircraft, all based out of Santo Domingo, but they're flying to something like, as of today, 19 destinations from Santo Domingo. So I want to explain something to you about why this is extremely important and why I'm extremely excited. I'm talking about it almost every day with the team because it brings capacity that was not ever expected to be here. We were used to Canadian aircraft, American aircraft, European aircraft, but we never had aircraft based here. And when you think about it, if a country like this that has so much, it's like the #1 destination in the Caribbean, and they didn't have their own airline, country airline, just like a flag airline like Air Canada, flying to the DR. So all of a sudden, they ramped up. They're supported by Bain Capital out of Boston. Bain Capital, if you Google that, it's part of the Mitt Romney was one of their 4 original partners in Bain Capital. And they are billions of dollars of acquisitions, specifically in the hotel and tourism industries. If you're American, you can read an example of them that they bought Apple Vacations out of Newtown, Pennsylvania, USA 3000 Airlines back then, and all their hotel group, which was, they have about 40 all-inclusive resorts in Mexico and here in the DR. But Bain Capital bought them out half a dozen years ago or so and really put that company on the platform. So where that impacts here in the DR is that now, as Santo Domingo is a hub for 19 destinations, they've now started to announce North American gateways. So the first gateway they announced about 2 weeks ago is Toronto. So starting in October, they're flying 4 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, I think it is, 4 days a week into Toronto, 185 seats every single flight. And what's most important about that is this. WestJet, Sunwing, Air Canada, and Air Transat are primarily 80%, 85% all-inclusive passengers going to those hotels. So air-only passengers wanting to come and buy property, stay in a condo, an Airbnb, there's only 15% of those aircraft that are available for air-only. Arajet is not in the all-inclusive business. They're not in the hotel business. They're in the airline business, which means 100% of that aircraft is dedicated for anybody to do whatever they want. So the restrictions are off. 4 days a week into Toronto, and you can imagine this. If you love the Dominican Republic like we do, when you step on board your flight and you can have a cold presidente in the first one and a half seconds on the plane, and you have Dominican products, everything, Dominican music playing, and the flight attendants and the airline staff are all Dominican, it changes your mood like instantly. It's no longer the Air Canada staff of, hey, I've been here for 35 years as a flight attendant. No, they're young, they're hip, and brand new aircraft, etc. So that was 2.5 weeks ago. Just last week, they announced, starting in November of this year, they start flying into Montreal 4 days a week on the same schedule. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, out of Montreal to Santo Domingo. Now, third step of this conversation is that Santo Domingo is a hub city. So if you are like Stephen and I and other people living in the Dominican Republic, the hub of Santo Domingo now can go Toronto, Santo Domingo, and then onwards for 17 to 19 additional destinations. So if you want to go to Mexico, Cancun specifically, Ecuador, Guatemala, Colombia, Brazil, Chile, what am I leaving out?
Oh God, there's
St. Martin,
bunch.
Aruba, Jamaica, Havana, Cuba, and many more. You now fly Toronto, Santo Domingo, and connect onwards in their system. We, as Canadians, haven't had connecting southbound aircraft at a reasonable speed. And that's so important. So we can, as Dominicans and Canadians living in the Dominican Republic, go for an inexpensive weekend to whatever gateway they fly. That is extremely important. So Stephen has done a couple of trips. I'll get him to talk about his customer service experience. I've done a trip to Colombia already, and I think my Colombia trip was less than $300 US return from Santo Domingo. Mm-hmm. But before we get there, the fourth or fifth step of this conversation is they've now started a hub in Santiago flying to Colombia. So we now know, you can see the business plan pretty clear with Arajet. The two main cities in the DR will have aircraft based there. Santo Domingo is an hour and hour and a half from Santo Domingo Airport to Punta Cana and Bavaro. It's 1 hour to La Romana, which covers La Romana, Bayahibe, and Dominicus, which we have a new office coming soon. And then, of course, from Santo Domingo Airport to Las Terrenas is 2 hours door to door. Mm-hmm. So we have now options from Montreal and Toronto directly into if you will, Las Terrenas with an easy 2-hour drive. That is huge because we didn't have 4 flights a week into Las Terrenas with any of those individual carriers we talked about before. So Steve, let's talk, why don't you talk about your service level?
That's all those details I know nothing about. I'm a pure consumer when it comes to flying and airlines, and I found out about Arajet maybe in December. I forget the first time I left. I've used them 3 times in the last year since it started. And I couldn't believe the flights. They were fantastic destinations. My first one was Guatemala, never been there before. So I'm looking on their website, $130 to Guatemala. How can I not?
US dollars?
How can I not?
Yep.
So there, spent the weekend, just weekend getaways is what I've been doing. Guatemala, then Colombia, and just recently Mexico, Cancun. Fantastic, super cheap, brand new planes, direct flights. And now that, and me being Canadian, now that it's going to Toronto, Montreal, that helps me even more in that way going back home. So no, it's fantastic all around.
Yeah, so it's going to make a difference to our overall business structure. So anybody watching from Quebec or Toronto area, or even in New York State, Niagara Falls, Buffalo, on the border cities in the US, it's going to be so much easier to drive to Toronto and then head south. And some of the flights too even have what I call the champagne flight details, like leaving Toronto at 12 noon, arriving in Santo Domingo at 4 p.m. So daylight flying, which means that you don't have to get up at 3 a.m.
Exactly.
And you get here by 6 p.m. in the Las Terrenas, as an example. But on your return flight, your flight is like 7 p.m. so that you have the whole day and then get going on the way to the airport. So now, check all the flight times. The website is right here, arajet.com. Check it out for yourself. I think Jan on our team, she's on the first flight to Toronto.
To Toronto, yeah.
That's for example on that.
October.
And a friend of mine, Nelson, is coming down for Christmas. He booked on Arajet.
Awesome.
So it's going to be a momentum. So we have to support Arajet because it's going to make a difference for all of us in flying. So Steve has the better idea right now with a beer in his hand.
Well,
it's like 3:30 in the
afternoon. He had one
afternoon.
too, but he drinks faster than me, so I had to walk with mine.
I was like,
I'm empty now.
So here we are. Glad to talk to you about the airline capacity. Don't forget, of course, Transat will be flying, Air Canada will be flying, and WestJet will continue to fly. But the more competition, the better. And that's what happens when airlines consolidate, others start up and make a difference. So that's it for now. Let's talk later on with more video. But of course, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Love to help you on all your real estate needs throughout the country, and look forward to talking to you soon. Okay?
2 thumbs up for Arajet.
2-2.